This is a beginner intro class for Python. Some things about Python. Python is a fantastic beginner language because it's simple and easy to read. It actually writes out like a paragraph, like an English paragraph. There's not as much syntax that you have to use in order to get code actually going. Syntax is basically the method in which things are written. For example, the syntax for an English sentence is going to be you capitalize the first letter and all nouns, and then you have punctuation at the end, right? That's the syntax for making an English sentence. Syntax for programming, depending on the language, you can have semicolons different places, parentheses different places, all kinds of different little nuanced things that are just kind of a pain in the neck to keep up with. Python has very minimal amount of that, which is great. So that's why it's simple and easy to read. It's very versatile. It's one of the most popular languages in the world right now. There's a lot of demand out there for developers who can actually work with it. And part of the reason why Python is super popular is because it doesn't have to be super fast like the days gone past. C++ is a much faster language. It takes longer to write in, but if you have limited hardware, it runs very quickly. There have been whole games made on just C++. That said, Python, although it runs a little bit slower programmatically, it actually is compensated by the advancements that have come across in technology when it comes to hardware. So the hardware is great, so the software doesn't have to be lightning fast. So developers are prioritizing writing speed over actual runtime, because I can write a whole lot more code. Oh, wouldn't it? It would just pop up right as I was. Good job. So you can make sure to select the proper programming language. Sometimes whenever you install Visual Studios, it comes default with a bunch of other stuff selected. Mine came with C++, which is neat. So make sure you click the empty project. If I click this one here, it starts in C++, so you'll want to click Python first. You can also do it here. And then we'll go New Application. You'll give it a name. I use main for this particular experience, and then you'll click create, and it's going to make something that looks like what I had on earlier. This, except without all this. Okay. So go ahead and open up your code to this point here. We're actually going to start typing. It's kind of program tradition that your first time you code, you will write in hello. So we're going to use a command prompt called print, followed by an open parentheses. Notice how when I put the open parentheses, it automatically gave me the other one. My mouse keeps sliding. Tell me you're a beginner without telling me you're a beginner. Okay, so, and inside the print statement, we're going to put a double quote. Again, notice how whenever I did the one, it automatically added the other. We're going to type in the words hello world. Hello world. And then we're going to click the start button at the top. You can also click F5 on your keyboard. That just executes the code. Whatever's listed in the main file that we created runs.
Guys, we didn't find any interpreters.
Okay, give me just a moment.
Okay, so what it did was it created a black box, kind of a pop-up. This is similar to the terminal that we looked at earlier. Our hello world is listed here. Okay. And it says, press any key to continue, that's what closes it. Now what I would like you to do is replace the word world with your first name. And then we're going to click execute. Well, I'm sorry, execute. That's what it used to be. Start. My little box pops up on the wrong screen, so I'll have to drag it over and show. Oh, I went too quick. Did yours pop up? Great. function takes in whatever's in the middle, we call that an argument. It takes in whatever that condition is and it shows it to the screen, displays it, if you will. There are many different functions that are kind of like print, but print's my favorite. Now we're going to talk about something called variables. Variables are different things that we can tell the computer without having to duplicate the effort. So for example, instead of John here, I can say, type in the word name is equal to John. Okay? So instead of putting John there, I can select, close it down.
There it is. Hello, John. So this print function takes in whatever's in the middle. We call that an argument. It takes in whatever that condition is and it shows it to the screen, displays it, if you will. There are many different functions that are kind of like print, but print's my favorite. Now we're going to talk about something called variables. Variables are different things that we can tell the computer without having to duplicate the effort. So for example, instead of John here, I can say, type in the word name, which is equal to John. Right? So instead of putting John there, I can select, close it down.
Question.
Yes.
Again, I'm typing this on my iPad. Does it matter if name or print are capitalized or not capitalized? Or?
That's a great question. Normally for regular variables, we do lowercase.
Gotcha.
If there's something that's not going to be changed throughout your program, we call that a constant. That's normally where every character in that word is capitalized.
Gotcha.
So if you wanted to do, if you're doing a math program, for example, and you wanted to say pi, you would capitalize pi, and that's equal to the number 3.14. Because pi doesn't change, you know, if you were to use it later on. Does that make sense?
Right.
But name might change if we're referring to a different user later in the program. So now I'm going to execute hello plus name. And it's going to take those two strings. I keep having to pop over to this other monitor. Oops. And it should display the name John that's listed here is a particular data type called a string. You can think of a string as a bunch of letters or characters put together in one package. So if I wanted to just put, instead of, this mouse is going to drive me bonkers. All right. So instead of name, we're going to erase name, we're going to put greeting. And I'm going to do hello John, like that. I put a space there, it's just taking its time. I may end up having to do another recording. It's okay. So now, wow, it added all the spaces. So now what the system is going to do on a different screen is it's going to take that variable greeting and it's going to pass that information into this print function so that behind the scenes it doesn't look like print name. Oh,
Print greeting.
this is a good example. This is an exception. It's a problem. I'm asking it to print a variable called name and I haven't told it what name is yet. I forgot to change that we changed it to an actual separate variable. There we go. We'll stop it. We'll start it back again. But it caught it, which is cool. And as I drag it from the other screen, you can see it printed my greeting. Hello, John, as a string. It even included all the spaces in between, which is cool.
Hello, John.
Yeah. There are keywords that you can't really use as variable names. Print is a really good example of one of them. You can't say print is equal to 1, 2, 3 because it's going to be confused by that print. It thinks print is trying to do print to the screen. So you can't really use that too much. Yes.
So the first time you typed print, and then hello world, you put a space between print and the. I'm working on the terminology.
This is a parentheses?
Yeah. It doesn't matter if there's a space or no space?
The proper technique is to keep the space away from it.
Gotcha.
But you can put it in or not. This is the correct way.
Correct way is no space. Gotcha.
It's not going to break the code because the computer is going to ignore all of that extra. It's called white space. The computer is not going to see it. It's going to go to the very next thing. So for example, too much for my visual.
All that white
So if I do that, it's just going to do the exact same thing. It's going to find that greeting, and it's going to print it, and it's going to ignore all that white space because it doesn't do anything.
Right.
The white space that's inside this program is so that we can, as humans, read it better. Now with Python, white space is very important later on when it comes to more complex functions, but we'll get into that whenever it's important. I know this is very basic, probably boring, but we'll get into some good stuff in a minute.
Not boring.
Now you can reuse the same code in different places. So I mentioned earlier that you can actually change what a variable is later on. So we're going to say hello to an imaginary friend of mine named Andrew. I'm going to fix some of this white space here. And then we're going to print out that again. So what this is going to look like is we're going to print a hello John. It's going to change that greeting to hello Andrew, and then it's going to print hello Andrew the second time. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we're going to execute that. Drag this over. There's hello John and then hello Andrew. So the first time it encountered that print, it went to greeting and it saw what was saved in that spot, that label. What does that label represent? It represents the string of characters, hello John. Then it reassigned what that label was looking at to hello Andrew. And then the second time it printed, it didn't print the first one because the new value was hello Andrew. Make sense? Okay. Now notice that the strings that we have here, I'm going to get rid of hello Andrew. Goodbye Andrew. All right. Notice that the strings that we actually have in a double quotation, but you can actually use single quotations as well, and it works just the same. It's actually important to know that you can do both because there are some situations where you're actually going to have both. So let me show you that that works just the same. Hello, John. There are things that you can do to the string as part of it being a string, special properties or functions inside of it. One of those is we can turn all of the letters inside into a capital letter. So greetings dot upper. What this is going to do is it's going to take every letter that's inside our string and it's going to turn it into an uppercase. Now it's, hello, John! Now, how do you think that we're going to be able to get it changed to lowercase?
Type it in lower.
Lower. right. Then we execute it. We'll bring it over. Now everything is in lowercase. This is really great as a function, the dot lower, surrounded by the parentheses. Make sure that you can see that. This lower and then the parentheses. This is a built-in function of the string. Just like print takes and does stuff within that parentheses, it prints whatever's on the inside. This lower is applied to that string, hello John, and it makes it all lowercase. This is great for data consistency. Let's say you get information from a user, they're trying to enter in their username and password. Sometimes they'll accidentally make something uppercase and they don't need to, or the way that you have the security set up on a website, you're going to make everything lowercase. No matter what their password is, make it all lowercase and apply it. This is one way to do it. We'll take in that user, make it all lowercase. There's some other things that you can do too, which is kind of cool. I'm going to change our initial string to a capital H and a lowercase j. Normally I would take the time to print it out, but that's what it looks like. We're actually going to change another string function called title, as in like a title of a book. Oops, I forgot to hit the key to escape. So normally, like with a title of a book, you'll capitalize the first letter of everything in the title. So if you're working for a newspaper company and they need a headline, capitalize all the letters. You can do it with one function, title. Let's say we want to add some extra space into our actual... Oh, getting ahead of myself. This is more important. We're going to erase this first string. We're going to say phrase. I'm not going to make the mistake of forgetting it again. We're going to print the phrase. So we're going to say John's favorite. Oh, I capitalized it. John's favorite programming language is Python. We get a bunch of red squigglies. I say that it's yelling at me. The reason why it's angry, and it actually won't run, if we try and execute it with all these red squigglies, it's saying that we have errors. What happens if we try and launch with the errors? It gives us this thing called a traceback error. And it actually shows us where the error is. This is really important. So again, the syntax is the structure on how code is put together. The syntax here is, it's looking for the single quotation, and we meant for it to find the last single quotation, but what it saw was the apostrophe that I meant for John's to show possessive. So it actually thinks that the string that's supposed to be there is just the word John. It completely thinks that there's something else supposed to be with the rest of it. Like, what does the rest of this mean? So we have to fix that. This is why it's important to know that you can use double quotes within a string. And they have to match on the ends. So you can use a double on one side and a single on the other. So now that I put double quotes surrounding it, I can use the apostrophe in it, single quote, anywhere that I please. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
John's favorite programming language is Python. So true. And it worked just fine. Now let's say get an input from a user. We ask them what their favorite programming language is, and this is what they type in. John's favorite programming language is Python, but they hit the space bar right at the beginning, and they have a lot of white space in the beginning. So when you print that out, it'll do exactly what you say. That's the best thing about computers and the worst thing about computers. They'll do exactly what you tell it to, even if you don't mean for it to be that way. So if we look at the output, it shows us there's all this white space here. And occasionally you won't be able to control if there's actual white space there or not. Let's say I don't want any there. There's another built-in function to the string item itself that allows me to take away all of that white space. We're going to strip out all that extra white space and just start with the first actual character that it finds. And if I'm stripping it from the left-hand side of the string, it's going to be L strip, followed by the closing parentheses. Almost forgot what that was called. Now what it's going to look like is we're going to run it, and it's going to take away all of that extra white space at the beginning of the phrase, just like we intended it to. When you are getting input from a user, it's unfortunate, but you have to think about how many different ways can this person break what I'm trying to get them to do. If I want you to answer in a form, and I'm taking in your age, so I can determine if you can drive or if you can vote, and you enter in letters, and I'm expecting numbers, it's not going to work. So I have to account for those types of scenarios and try and be proactive. Stripping out the white space from what our user gave us, possibly gave us, allows us to have more uniformity with those actual inputs. We're going to change programming language to food. So John's favorite food is space. And I'm going to assign the variable food to another string. We're going to go with tacos. Period.
Quick question.
Yes.
The L strip, that is called a variable?
The variable was the actual string phrase.
What is the L strip called?
It's a function. Just like upper and lower.
Right. Function. That's where it is.
Now what we're going to do is we're going to take these two strings, phrase and tacos. I'm sorry, tacos. Phrase and food. We're going to put them together so that it makes a cohesive sentence. We're going to format to where the end result is going to be dinner. So dinner is equal to, we're going to do some quotes here. I'm going to put the letter F at the front. The F represents format. Now I need to tell it what it's formatting. So I use some curly braces to tell it that the first thing that goes into the string is the phrase that I came up with earlier, and then a space, and then another couple curly braces for the food. I'm going to show you what it's going to do without the F, and we're going to print dinner. I wish I could print dinner. Visual food like that. The way of the future. So even with these curly braces, Python, I keep forgetting that it's going to be printing over here. Even though the curly braces are in it, the string is just those special characters and the names that we gave it. But when we put this F at the front and we tell it that, hey, Python, when you're looking at this string, anything that's after this is going to be formatted a special way. So it's going to look for these curly braces, and it's going to know if I see curly braces in this string of characters, that means it's looking for a variable that was created earlier. So it's going to see the F, know to look for the curly braces, find phrase, put that first phrase into the string, have another space because that's what's after, and then it sees another curly brace and it knows that that's part of the formatting and it's going to add in that last bit. So we're going to print that out. Oops, trying to drag it using the thing. Apologies. I would like you to type this particular bit out. Well, except instead of me, it can be you and then your favorite food. I'm excited about this next part.
So since there is a space between is and tacos, if you wanted to eliminate the space, the L strip would go.
That's a great question. L strip is for the beginning of a string.
Okay.
You could use R strip if there were extra white space at the end of a string. But I'm glad that you pointed it out because this is actually what I was going to allude to next.
Good job.
There are 2 spaces between is and tacos. Where on here do you think those 2 spaces come from?
She pointed it out. One is in the phrase, and the other one is between in the format.
That's correct.
Of phrase and food.
So it sees it in both spots. So I'm going to remove it from the end of this string. And then I'm going to leave it in the other one. We're going to rerun it. And we'll see that it's been formatted properly with just 1 space between each of the individual words.
Could you still do it the opposite way with removing the phrase between, or removing the space between?
The space between? Absolutely.
Cool.
Because it loads in everything that's in that phrase variable into that string, and it sees it all the way across.
Nice.
Okay, we're doing great on time, too. Phrase, food. The next thing that we're going to talk about are numbers. So I'm going to delete all this. Did anybody else need this just for the time being? People online?
Here's notes if y'all need it.
Oh.
Here's this if y'all need it. We pass that down.
Also, all of this that we're reviewing is going to be in chapter 2 of the digital textbook that I sent out. So you'll get that. I think it starts on page 11. Okay?
Okay.
So that was a string. Oops. Name equals quote John. We're going to make another variable called age. This age is going to be an int value or an integer. This is how that word is spelt. An integer, if you think back to, I think, elementary school, those are whole numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, -2, -3. Whole numbers, integers. I'm 35, I think. Great. So now, name has been assigned to the value of John, and age has been assigned the value, the integer value of 35. There's another value that we can use called a float. This is what it's spelled like. Notice how it highlights in a special color. That's one of those key words that you can't use as a variable. Float. So instead of float, let's think. I have no idea how tall I am in inches, but we'll just say height. I am 6'2". So that's 6. If we're trying to convert that over into inches, we're going to do 6 times 12, right? Because that's inches. And at the end, we're going to add 2. I know I said that we were going to do floats. This is not float. This is actually just math. You can do math and programming. It's great. And it follows your standard PEMDAS logic. Parentheses, exponent, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. PEMDAS. All right, I think that's middle school stuff. So it's going to do this multiplication here in the middle. And it's going to add 2 to it because I'm 6'2". So now I'm going to do a print statement. We're going to print out. We're going to make this an F string. Again, that's F string. That stands for formatted string. Okay? We're going to make an F string. Why is it called F? Because we put an F at the beginning. I'm going to type in my name is, open and close curly braces, name, and then a comma just because I like them. I am, and then for the age, space, years old, period. I am height, inches tall. Let me kind of zoom out a little bit so that it gets the whole thing in the frame. This first deal is print. You guys have this first section? We're just copying the thing. Okay. So again, this is a formatted string, an F string, that we're printing out. Now, earlier, what we did when we captured that information for the favorite food is we did that outside of the print statement. What we're doing here is we're putting that F string, the formatted string, inside the print statement itself. So what it's going to do, by the time it gets to print, it's going to do everything on the inside of the parentheses first, and then it's going to print whatever that result is. It's going to assign name to my name, John, age to 35, height to the sum of whatever that height is. It's going to print all that to the screen. Make sense? Let me show you. There we go. Apparently I'm 74 inches tall. I wasn't going to put my weight, sorry. BMI, you guys can hang that out. But it took each of those variables inside those curly braces and it put that into it automatically. What's cool about that is we're able to adjust those values later on. So if I wanted to, let's just say I copy all of this, and I go down below and print it all again. And now I change John to my wife Sherry, the wonderful. Trying to get some bonus points. She is, I don't think she would mind, 34. She is 5'2". It's going to, for this first print statement on line 5, it's going to grab all the information that I put about me. It's going to put it into that print statement. Then, as it goes through, it's going to reassign the values of those variables to the computed values that we gave it. And then it's going to print all that stuff out. I'm going to show you what that looks like in real time. Take a look up here real quick. I promise, I'll let you get back to that. But I want to show you what this looks like in real time. In Visual Studios, it's really important to be able to look at how things transform as it goes through your code. Because if you have a variable that changes 6 times, let's say we have 6 different people, and something goes wrong, I need to know at what point did it go wrong. And the best way to do that is to do what's called step through your code. we go line by line, and we can look at how each of these individual variables change as we're going through the process. So let me show you what that looks like. If you can see my mouse, I'm going to go over here to the left-hand side of the numeric values, my numbers here. I can select, but if I go just a little bit further, you'll see the cursor change direction. Or come, oh, did it? Am I tripping? Yeah. It's so big. Let me, I need to be able to see it. Wow. All right, let's try this again. Okay. Yeah, there we go. So if your screen resolution is better than mine, again, what we did was we went to the left-hand side of the numeric values, saw that it changed direction, and we put in what's called a breakpoint. Now this breakpoint's really cool. Highlights in red, very hard to miss. Does a little highlighting here. And when I click start, what the program is going to do is it's going to run everything before that breakpoint. It's going to reach that breakpoint and stop. It's not actually going to run what's on that line. It's just going to hold there for a minute. Like I can tell my kids, hold. So I'm going to click start. And we're going to see some different things that we haven't seen before in this course. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to have to keep this off the big screen. I'm going to have to do it like this. Sorry, y'all. Okay. So we got our variables. Down here, do you have a watch screen?
What?
This little window here at the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
Does it say watch?
No, it says Apple.
We're going to do this one more time. We've got, all right, so we have the breakpoint, the red dot,
Okay.
by the age. Good.
Okay.
And then I'm going to go up here, I'm going to click start. Python is going to run all the code up until that point. I have nothing on my output window.
It's up there now.
Okay, so you see the watch window you mean? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. That's my mistake. I apologize.
No, I think we forgot to put our breakpoint and start.
No worries.
We're there now.
But it won't show up, I just found out, if the code isn't actively in debugging mode. Which makes sense. So we have a watch window down here. We're going to put in our three variables: name, enter, age, enter, and height, enter. Oops. And that's in our watch window. And this thing has saved me so many times. It's very handy to be able to step through your code and see how these things change as you're going throughout it. Apologies to all my people with my first upload. This is going to be a little weird, but we'll get there. If you have your variables put into the watch window, notice how the first one, John, or your name, is listed there. We have a value, so the name of the variable is name. The value here is John. Notice also that it's with the single quotes instead of the double quotes like we had earlier. That's okay. And then the type, this is important too. The type is the data type. str, that's short for string. So now we've got age. This window here, these buttons, do you see on your computer a little red square that says stop debugging? Don't click it, just kind of hover over it. Mm-hmm. There's a reset button, a restart. There's a forward button that shows the next one, and then step into and then step over, F10 and 11. You can use your mouse to click them. What I like to do is use the keyboard itself. If you have the F10 and 11 keys on your keyboard, you can click those. That will help you step through the next. If I wanted to, I could put another breakpoint in, even though it's running. And I could click this play button here, this green one, and continue, and it's going to run everything up until the next point. So when we were at line 2, it hadn't run line 2 yet. But after I clicked continue, I entered the breakpoint at 5 first, and then I clicked continue. It ran everything up until line 5 and stopped at 5. So now it hasn't run 5, so we don't have anything on our output window yet. But notice how we have the variables updated here on our screen. Name is still John. Age is 35, like we assigned in line 2, as an integer value, integer. And then our height is our 74, that's our computation. This is another important thing to understand. With programming, as a general rule, it will do everything on the right-hand side of the equal sign first before putting it onto the left. This equal sign, this is called an assignment. So it's going to assign the variable height with whatever was the results of what was on the right-hand side. Does that make sense?
So it reads it backwards.
Right. It's the last thing that happened. Now, mathematically, the parentheses goes first with the multiplication, then it adds the 2. That's how we got the 74.
Right.
So it does everything on that side first, and the last thing that it does is the assignment, which makes sense because you don't want to assign the variable a partial and then add extra stuff to it. That's confusing. So we have these variables, these assignments. And now we're going to click on this little over arrow, this F11, step over. I'm just going to click it with my mouse one time. And notice, because it's been there this whole time, it's just been within these red dots, this little yellow arrow, this is going to be your best friend. This little arrow showed us how it went from 2 to 5, and now it's on 7, because we don't have anything on line 6. And you should have your output window where it executed everything on line 5, which was that print statement where it filled in our variables. And as you can see, we have the output for that, where it took those variables, put it in, ran that code, and stopped, because we only told it to go over to the next one thing. We stepped over to the next. You can click F11 on your keyboard to do that, or this little arrow key. If you don't have an arrow key here, you may have to move it like I did. Just with limited space with the minimized. But you can do, as you like. But these are important, especially as you're stepping through the things. So now we stopped at line 7. We have our string. We've got our first printout here. But we're not quite done yet. So we're going to click F11 or that next over key, right? And as you can see, name has been run. It wasn't earlier, now it has. And notice here down in our watch window, Sherry the Wonderful is highlighted in the color red. This is Python's way of showing us, or Visual Studio's way of showing us, hey, something has changed here with the last execution of the line before. So now name has been updated. It's still a string, we can see. It's still just the name variable, but it has changed. Notice how these other ones haven't changed yet, but they will. I'm going to hit F11 again. It's going to move to line 9. Now after line 7 ran, Sherry the Wonderful was in red. But now that line 8 has run, Sherry has stayed the same, but the age has been updated from my age to her age. Make sense? Which is why it's indicated in red. This is going to be really helpful to see what changes in your variables as you're stepping through your code. The reason I'm taking so much time on this right now is because you're going to break something eventually, and this is going to be how you can figure out how to fix it. Like, why is the math breaking? I can step through and see, oh, I used 2 asterisks instead of 1, and that raised it as an exponent instead of just a simple multiplication. Forgot to show that earlier. But you can do addition, subtraction, multiplication. This raises to the power, which is awesome. So that's where the problem, it went from, it was supposed to be 35 and now it's, I don't know, 6 to the power of 12. That's a bunch. I have no idea. I have no clue what that is. But the computer would know. So now we're going to click F11 again, or this little over arrow, step over. And it's going to go down to the next line. Notice that we have 62 has changed, highlights in red, but the print statement hasn't executed yet. So we're going to print out the second one by clicking the over arrow again. If it's the end of where you're wanting to look, you can click the play button. I keep pointing to the screen. You guys can't see it. So I keep pointing to it. You can click the continue button or the over. And now we have our final result. The first string with all of the first variables, and the second string has been updated with all the other stuff. And we have successfully stepped every line through our code. It took some time, but it's going to save you in the long run, I promise. Any questions so far from my group on how to step through, why it's important, anything about the watch window? I want to make sure that we're really clear before wrapping up. Good? All right. Your assignment, if you dare. I forgot to talk about the Zen of Python real quick. The Zen of Python is a philosophy that rules all of Python. It says that beautiful is better than ugly. Makes sense. When it comes to code, that simple is better than complex. When you're writing code, you want to use variables that make sense. I wrote out all of name, but I could just use the letter N. But later on, if it's hundreds of lines long, I don't know what N is. So I wrote out name. Keeping it simple. But complex is better than complicated. Readability counts. You're going to forget what some of this stuff is later on. One of the ways that you could combat that is to use something called a comment. You put in a pound sign, a hashtag, a hash sign, whatever you want to call it. That's what it looks like. And you can see the color change. This is a comment. And you can document it. Python's going to see that symbol. It's going to completely ignore it. That's just for us humans. Comment your code. It's super important. Readability counts. And lastly, second to lastly, there should only be one preferably obvious way of doing something. With programming, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. There are hundreds of different ways to just get what we have on the screen here. But there should only be one obvious way. And we do that. And lastly, now is greater than never. Do some coding now and you'll thank yourself later. So your homework, we're going to program out using variables. Your name is a variable. Your height in inches, using very similar to what we did in class. Per foot. I want to know your favorite food. And then I want you to find someone in your life that you can put in those variables for them as well. And I want you to have 2 print statements. One with your name, age, and height printed. And then another one where you change those variables to something else. Name, age, and height. Okay?
Are we still doing the at each stage of the following use print statements to check?
No, you don't have to print.
Okay.
But I do recommend at least stepping through your code completely at minimum one time. You all have the ability to give me a call. And this has been your regular scheduled programming.